Hi everyone, welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I am the host of the show and a writer and performer based in lovely Los Angeles, California. Put an asterisk on that lovely. It's fine. You know what? We have a dog, we have a car. Sure, there's incredible wealth disparity and a homeless problem that the city doesn't seem invested in solving. But what was I saying about Los Angeles? That was fine. Hey, great episode today. My guest is Magdalene Visaggio. Now, if you don't know who she is, let me read you her bio right now. Born in Long Island but raised in Richmond, Virginia, Magdalene has been making comics for over a decade, but it wasn't until 2016 that she began to garner acclaim thanks to her series Kim and Kim, which netted Magdalene both an Eisner Award nomination and a GLAAD Award nomination. Since then, she's written a number of great comics, including Eternity Girl, Morning in America, and currently she writes Dr. Mirage for Valiant. In addition to all this, her series Vagrant Queen was bought by Sci-Fi and will be premiering on a television near you sometime in 2020. I saw a trailer for it. It looks like it is on the fun end of the Sci-Fi series and not on the grim / schlocky end of the Sci-Fi. So, like, put it with The Expanse and Z Nation, and not with the legion of shows that I can't even think of their names. I first found out about Magdalene because of Morning in America. I read it. I thought it was really wonderful. And then I found out she lives in New York. And I was back there in... Oh, God. When was this? August? Yeah, I think Naomi and I went back to New York in August for a little bit. We did some shows for couples therapy in New York and Philadelphia. And... on probably one of the hottest days of the summer, Magdalene came down and we sat, instead of going to where the studio used to be in the Harlem house, we sat in my mother-in-law's sitting room on the first floor and had a wide-ranging discussion, mostly about faith. I found it infinitely fascinating. Magdalene had gone to seminary, I think. I don't know how far she had gotten in it, but... she did study theology and philosophy and morality, so we talk a lot about that stuff. Very interesting. And she's just lived a very fascinating life, so I hope you enjoy this. If you are a first-time listener to Beginnings, thank you for checking out the show. If you'd like to check out other episodes, you can get them all on Spotify, or if you want to download them, you can get them at beginnings.libsyn.com. What I like to do in this intro is recommend some episodes for you, kind of like a Netflix. If you like this, you might like this other episode. Magdalene is a comics writer. I've done a number of episodes with comics people. For example, Chris Claremont, longtime writer of the X-Men, has been on the show. Sina Grace. Who else has been? Cecil Castellucci. That was really good. Jackson Public. Paul Hornschmeyer, Michael Kupperman. That was great. Charles Sewell, Fred Van Lente, Kate Beaton, Lisa Hannawalt. Bill Griffith, the creator of Zippy the Pinhead, has been on the show before. So if you like this episode, you like those episodes, and you want to subscribe, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, probably a bunch of other places. You can find me on social media at Andy Beckerman, both on Instagram and Twitter. And I think that's about it. Great episodes coming up. I just talked to some of the lads from Twin Peaks, the band. Michael Cronin is going to be on. Larry Hankin. If you don't know him, he's a longtime character actor. You probably know him as the downstairs neighbor on Friends, but you've seen him everywhere. He has an incredible history. He started out in Greenwich Village in the 60s, literally hanging out with Bob Dylan, and, not so cool now, but in 1964, it was cool that he was hanging out with Woody Allen. And who else is going to be on? Oh, Sarah Bolger. I just talked to her. She's a wonderful Irish actress. She's in Mayans MC, which is on FX. So look out for these episodes and a bunch. I've done a bunch of other really cool conversations with musicians and actors. So stay tuned. But for now, I hope you enjoy my talk with Magdalene. Right before we started recording, you said that you love Los Angeles or California, maybe in general.
I love Los Angeles specifically. I really love Southern California overall.
So that makes me think, because being out there, I've realized in hating it that it's not the city. I mean, I have lots of problems with like a lot of things there. I happen to think it's a haven for some very stupid people and narcissists. In general, but
that's cool because I'm a stupid narcissist.
But here's the thing. But I found that like if you are a laid back person, that you seem to that those kinds of people seem to enjoy California, the West Coast in general. And if you're an anxious mess like I am, or like my wife is, then it feels discordant to have a very beautiful, placid kind of weather, and to have the ocean there and all this kind of stuff. And inside, you're just feeling awful all the time. So it feels like there's this kind of tension between those things that feels bad to us.
I can totally get that. I am pretty laid back, and what was I gonna say? Sorry. But yeah, like I am a pretty laid back person. And it just like I really clicked with the vibe. I remember I was staying in an Airbnb in Hollywood, and I was just kind of like walking down this little side street, this little winding side street that was that would have brought me to Sunset. And I just saw these like three like 40-year-old guys in like shorts and t-shirts sitting on the frickin' curb smoking weed. And it was just like, oh man, this is my people. I belong. It was just so chill.
And you're a chill person.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the thing.
Yeah.
I think because of that, but you were, again, before we started recording, when we did a sound test, I had you say where you were born. You're from New York.
Yeah, I am originally from New York. My family's Long Island people. I grew up in Virginia because we moved to Virginia when I was a kid. When I was like 2 or 3 years old. So I grew up in Central Virginia, Richmond. Moved up here after college, and I've been up here for 10 years.
So do you think you were formed as a person mostly in Virginia?
I feel like there's no easy way to answer that. Both of my parents are New Yorkers. I have a ton of New York family. We went up there frequently. My parents had the accent for all through my childhood. We would go back and watch old home videos, and my mom's out talking like this, and it's so cool. But I feel like when I was in Virginia, I felt like a New Yorker, and when I'm in New York, I feel like a Virginian. And then when I'm in LA, I just feel like a New Yorker because I'm just running everywhere and everyone's in my way. Yes.
Oh, God. There's nothing I love more. When I was at Comic-Con this year, after a while, it got very annoying, but like something sparked in me when I had to like shove through a bunch of people, where there were like a bunch of people just like walking real slow or like crowding around to take like a blurry picture of Agent Coulson from like 100 feet away. And I'm like, get the fuck out of my way. I'm like, oh, I like that. I like having to shove through people. I like the after a while, obviously, I was just like, I just want to leave here.
No, but like, I get it. Like when I'm on the West Coast, I'm just constantly stuck behind walls of people ambling. And I'm like, oh, because you all drive. None of you are trying to get anywhere right now. You're just out. I'm trying to get somewhere because like I've never been a driver. The last time I drove a car was 14 years ago.
Yeah.
So I'm always just like I'm public transit, I'm bikes, I'm foot. And so if anyone's just like not operating in that space. They're just so actively in my way. And that's the great and horrible thing about New York is so many of us are living like that. And there's just so many tourists who, like, everyone says New Yorkers are rude, but it's like, no, you're just in the way.
Yeah.
And we have shit to do.
Yeah. But so the thing is, you in Virginia, you felt like a New Yorker. I'm from Pennsylvania, but my parents are from New York. And in Pennsylvania, I felt like a New Yorker. But then in New York, but because they raised me almost with the New York sensibility, I finally felt like I was in the right place when I moved to New York. And I think that's like, I think there's a weird quirk about being raised by someone from another place in somewhere with a very different culture. Like Virginia, I assume you can tell me, but like what the culture was like there. But I assume it's a very different culture from New York.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I grew up in suburban Virginia too. So I didn't grow up in like a city. And if it's just, I don't even know how to put it. There's just kind of this, I'm going to say some fucking like urbanite bullshit.
No,
I just going to be.
You're not going to say
that.
anything that I have not said. So
no, the suburbs just always felt really boring and tame to me. And a lot of that, I'm going to be straight up, is that I was not a particularly get out and about person. I've always been a homebody.
I feel you.
Yeah, and so like when I was a kid, I would bike around, but like when I was older, I didn't have a car, I couldn't drive, so there just wasn't shit to do. And whatever shit there was to do, I was unaware of it because I didn't have any friends. And I was not popular. And moving to New York, I was just like, oh, cool. Where I went to school was in downtown Richmond, like in Richmond City proper. And so I had spent, this big chunk of my life just living in an urban area where things were walkable or bikeable, and I didn't have to figure out how to navigate like the interstate to get around. And moved to New York, and it was just even more of that. It was even easier just to like live in the city and be a person who has experiences. If you have literally zero interest in driving terrifies me. I am so bad at it.
Yeah, you're taking your life. There's something different to me. We lived in Los Angeles for 2 years. We just got a car on last Monday.
So is it doable living there without a car?
Okay, here's two things. If you're very rich and you can get whatever the most expensive Uber or Lyft is, where you don't have to talk to someone and you don't have to you don't have to feel like you're being picked up by a parent after like school, then I think it's doable long term because this is going to sound name droppy, but it's only name droppy because Naomi had a meeting with Jordan Peele, and they were talking. They're both
cool.
New Yorkers, and he was saying that he didn't have a car. This was like over a year ago, so I don't know what has changed then. But he was saying he didn't have a car, and it's doable to use Lyft. But he's rich, so he can get around. He can buy whatever the most expensive Lyft is, and doesn't feel. It felt to us for 2 years using Lyft. First of all, the public transportation is terrible. And it's almost worthless.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Unless you have literally like 3 or 4 hours to get places. Yeah. But the feeling of Lyft it does at long term feels weird and gross and they're not getting paid very well. So there's this kind of like feeling of exploitation on top of it, having to talk to a weirdo. Real. Naomi felt unsafe a lot of times with people.
Yeah, that's very real. That's very real.
So I think it's doable in the short term, but I think in a city that is structured by having to have a car, I don't think it is doable long term.
Yeah, that's why I'm glad my girlfriend drives. So if we ever moved out there, we'd just get like a used Geo or something, and make it do that way.
But you were saying, okay, so
Virginian, Pennsylvanian,
Virginia, yeah. So I don't know much about Virginia. I don't know if I've had a ton of guests that are from Virginia. What is the culture like there, or specifically in Richmond? I mean, it's Southern.
I don't even
right?
know. Yes, we do have it is Southern, but it's first off, we're super upper South, and so And because we're super upper South, also like North Carolina, we've got a ton of northern transplants, like my family. But at the same time, it's a state that's just really intensely aware of its history because the bulk of both the Revolutionary War and the Civil War were fought in Virginia. So we're just very intensely aware of history, and was the capital of the Confederacy, and that's impossible to ignore, even though it's a city that's 70% black. There's the Confederate Chapel right by the Art Museum. There's the Confederate White House, where Jeff Davis lived. The fact that I just called him Jeff Davis. You know, like,
yeah, I picked on that too. I picked up on that too.
We get that because there's a Jefferson Davis Highway. Everyone just calls it Jeff Davis Highway. And then you just start saying Jeff Davis when you're talking about the historical figure, if you're someone who thinks about history at all, which I am. It's always just been a city that's always kind of felt like it doesn't know if it wants to be modern or not. And so Richmond, is where Guar came from. Richmond has always had a very big... Yeah, Guar was founded in what was at the time an abandoned dairy bottling plant that is now lofts that I nearly moved into at one point. But yeah, it was always been a very artsy city, very punk city for the last, since the 70s and 80s. It's got a fantastic art scene. There's a big comic scene there. There's a number of comics people who are Richmonders. Mark Wade went to the same school as me, VCU, in downtown Richmond.
Oh.
But it's clean. It's cleaned up a lot. And by cleaned up, I mean gentrified. They've torn down a lot of the real interesting punk ass shit that was there, like all the weird alternative shops operating out of things that used to be houses, where now there's just like restaurants and apartments. But it's just like it's always a place that's kind of torn between its past and its future. We have this big street called Monument Avenue, which is so named because of it's covered in statues of Confederate leaders. So you've got the big statue of Lee. It seems like the less important someone is, the more the writing there is on him, to the point that when you get to Lee, it just says Lee in block letters.
That's like someone who's I went to grad school, and you could tell there were people. I went to grad school for philosophy, and there were people who were not philosophers but wanted you to think they were, and you would look at the back of their books, and there would be like a huge thing. They would put doctor on it. They would make sure you knew that they had a PhD in something, and then their biography was long. But the real professors who were doing like real cool work just had their name, no doctor, and just like 2 lines or something like that. Yeah. It seems like the more that you're desperate to justify who you are, the more you're going to invest in trying to convince people.
I actually did graduate work in philosophy.
Yeah, I saw that. I want to talk about that. Yeah. You said, I saw in your bio, it said ethics and moral theology.
Yeah. Yeah, I went to Seton Hall. I was ABT on it. But yeah, my work situation changed, and I just no longer had the time to continue attending class because it's all the way out in fucking Orange in New Jersey.
Yeah,
it's a 2.5 hour to 3 hour trip from my apartment.
Yeah, I got kicked out because I won't go into it because people who regularly listen to the show have heard the story a million times. But essentially, I just did what I wanted to do, and they're like, "Please don't do that." And then I'm like, "No, I'm going to do what I want to do," and they're like, "No, seriously, don't."
For what is ultimately, and there's background readers, listeners, should probably be aware of. I used to be a very, very religious person. I went to seminary at one point.
Really?
I figured you would have stumbled across this.
I know like 3 facts about you. Like I really couldn't find. I did like searches on Google for like 3 pages, and
it's really just my Twitter.
Yeah.
But
and I know stuff about you from Twitter, which is
So I converted to Catholicism when I was 16, because I just really wanted to like have an identity and be a kind of person, and I felt like I wasn't anything. Got very, very into theology, got very, very religious, did seminary after college, that obviously didn't pan out, for what should be patently obvious reasons. And then after that, I was like, well, I still want to do that like intellectual work that I found so thrilling, and I really did. So I went to study. I went to basically to Seton Hall's theology school. But while I was there, I really discovered in a big way how much more interested I was in ethics than in what's called systematic theology, which is a lot of the stuff like, how many natures does Jesus have? Does the Holy Spirit proceed from the Father or the Father and the Son, which is a whole theological mountains move on that point. But like that was like so much less interesting to me than analyzing morality and the agency of the human person in terms of how we interact with others. And so more and more I started to drift in that direction. And by the time I left, I was basically just doing ethical work that had like a coat of theological paint over it, because I felt like I needed to justify it. But the thing is that my professor was Justin Anderson. Just such an incredible guy. If there's anything problematic about him, I don't know it. So don't get mad at me. But Dr. Anderson was like my graduate mentor, and I did very close, intense work with him. And I did this paper on, what was it? On the ethical nature of lying, on what's the moral, is there a moral absolute against lying?
Like Kant.
Why? What is a lie? That kind of stuff. It started off as a survey of how we've thought about lying throughout the history of philosophy.
Yeah.
Like you go with St. Augustine's Contra Mendacium, and it says anything that's designed to deceive, anything that is contramentum, or against your own mind. And I'm just kind of remember all this shit. And I eventually kind of leaned in this direction where I basically separated ethics from morality entirely. And in the notes I got back from it, he goes, 1, I think this is silly. And 2, this is absolutely publishable. Like, he's like, I disagree with your point, but you're making a really good case for it.
Well, that's the thing that bugged me
was really fun
about academia, which was you can do whatever, you can make all these, and this is partly why I was doing this during the Bush years, and I was watching our world turn into like a shit pile in front of my face, like invading Iraq and just George W. Bush in general. And we're here, I'm writing like some silly argument about Aristotle's metaphysics, and it like infuriated me. It infuriated me that academia, you could just make good arguments, and it didn't matter, like to the outside world. And that's the thing that bothered me so much.
Yeah, I can relate to that. The thing that actually really drove me crazy. So, like I said, I used to be very religious. My faith has very much fallen away. I don't know what I am anymore. I guess I'm Christian adjacent.
Are your parents religious?
My dad is. My mom isn't. My dad's in some. I grew up in a cult that my dad was in.
That's almost extremely common on the show. Like what was it? The Moonies? Was it?
No, it was the Way International. It had its big heyday in the 70s and 80s. At its peak, it had about 100,000 members. It collapsed in the late 80s, early 90s. My dad's in an offshoot group now that got rid of a lot of the more overtly culty things that they did. And now they're just kind of fundamentalist non-Trinitarians.
I mean, how did he get involved in it?
I don't actually really know how he got involved in it.
There are so many guests on the show whose parents are boomers and then were searching for some kind of meaning in the 60s and 70s and joined a cult.
Yeah. My dad left the Catholic Church when he was a teenager, and then just kind of did a bunch of drugs and made rock music. And my dad's still a rock musician.
Really?
Yeah, that's actually how my parents met, at a band scene party in Long Island in 1978.
Was he in like a touring band, like a bar band?
Yeah,
like
no,
what,
they were touring. They were a touring band. They weren't huge. They had some regional hits.
what's the name of the band?
It was Billy Falcon's Burning Rose, or sometimes just Burning Rose. I'm not really certain.
It's a great name.
Yeah, and they sounded a lot like Springsteen-y. But my dad's really into like weird, finky, progressive rock.
Yes.
And so that's what he does. Because
I mean,
my
also,
dad-
Yes, the
yeah,
band.
because he loves Yes. So I got raised on like Emerson, Lake and Palmer and stuff like that.
Magma?
What?
Any of the like weird European kind of stuff? Like Magma?
Not that I can think of, but it's possible. My dad exposed me to so much fucking music, but yeah. So he made rock music for a while and did a ton of drugs, and then I'm not sure exactly what happened, but he ended up speaking in tongues and becoming a disciple of this guy named Dr. Werewolf, or as I called him as a kid, Dr. Werewolf.
Sorry, my jaw dropped at the guy's name. Is such like a like.
Dr. Victor Paul Werewolf.
That is the name of like that's such a character name. That's the name you would find in a TV show.
Oh, I know, it's so perfect. The whole thing is such a scam. But I mean, it was just a tool for, him and his buddies to enrich themselves, and then his successor to enrich himself, and that was actually how everything collapsed. And there was like sexual abuse, and there was wife swapping, and there was gun maintenance. Like members of the inner circle were required to maintain weaponry for some reason.
Oh,
and that
shit.
came out. And all the while, we were a blue collar family. My dad's a truck driver. Actually, now he teaches trucking because he's in his 60s. It's harder now, but so like I said, we were a very blue collar house, so we were not well off. We were kind of a little in over our heads on our mortgage and stuff like that, and the way had this mandatory 15% tithe off your income. It was called abundance sharing, and if we hadn't given it, we got shunned until we had.
Jeez.
And one day my dad it just kind of clicked in my dad how he was just being used financially at that point, and we just stopped. And we lost all our friends. Like so many of the people that I grew up around disappeared entirely from our lives. I actually reconnected with one when I was in college because she was in the choir at my church.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And was this when you already moved to Richmond by the time your dad left the?
Yeah, we left.
The Way
International.
The Way International.
Yeah, we left when I was like 11.
So was that? I mean, were you brought up believing these things? I don't know even what the tenets of the Way International are.
Believing it in as much as a kid who doesn't really understand it, because it's actually all pretty theological. Like as much as I could have. And as much as I understood. My dad was a firm believer. My mom wasn't. My dad was gone every other week. We didn't go all the time. So it was very casual in my house unless my dad was home, when it became very, very present. But yeah, so we left. I became an atheist for a while, like a middle school atheist. You know the shit. And converted to Catholicism, and then did that for 15 years, and then was like, oh, this is a big problem, and I don't know how to do this anymore. Like, I don't know how to stay Catholic and transition. And I had like a number of friends who were kind of in the same boat, and none of us have stayed.
What initially appealed to you about Catholicism?
If I'm being honest, it was, like I mentioned earlier, that I was trying to I wanted to be somebody instead of nothing. And like I said, we grew up in Virginia. I have an Italian last name. My New York Italian family was all the way up in New York, so I didn't see them all the time. And I didn't feel like I had a strong connection to my family outside of my immediate family. My dad's whole side of the family, including him, because my dad was never home he was on the road for 2 weeks at a time, gone 2 weeks, home 2 days, gone 2 weeks, home 2 days, that kind of stuff. And I guess for me, it was all about just connecting to that lineage so that I could have an identity in something instead of feeling completely unmoored.
Yeah.
At the time, I managed to convince myself that I had higher reasons, that I'd had, like a mystical experience or something. And I did have a very intense emotional experience one day that prompted the decision, but I don't think it was God talking to me anymore the way I did when I was a kid.
But do you mind if I ask about it?
I don't want to get into it. It's a little complicated.
Yeah, I don't want to push you. I was just like...
It's not something I'm super comfortable talking about anymore because it led to 16 years of me lying to myself.
That's fair. I'm just so curious about the stuff. I don't think I've ever had faith. And so I'm curious about like that feeling so much of the time because I don't know if I've ever really felt
it's a great feeling. It's great. Like feeling the presence of God and in fact also actively feeling the absence of God are both very intense experiences. And so it's hard. Religion is hard for me to discount because I've had faith, even if I don't right now. I don't know that this isn't just a little blip in my life. I don't know if I'm wrong because I've been wrong about so many things in my life. That's been the hardest part about me hitting my late 20s and 30s has been, I've been wrong about literally everything I've ever believed. Okay. That's frustrating. So like I said, I can't discount religion. And I understand people who chase that feeling. But if the only thing I'm looking for is a feeling, maybe I shouldn't commit myself to a massive ethical system that goes alongside it that is intensely hostile to people like me.
Yeah.
But it's really incredible. Like adoration in front of the Eucharist is just, I cannot describe how much I miss receiving communion, receiving the presence of God into myself, like I can't do it anymore because I don't know if I believe that. But when I did, that's a powerful thing. It would make me cry.
I mean, is there any way... the ethical system of Catholicism, I've never found an easy way for most religions I've never found a way to reconcile a completely empathetic ethical system that says all people are worthy of your consideration. And the religions that take like a one sentence in the Bible and then turn that into a way of taking away the humanity from groups of people.
Well,
does that make sense?
No, it does. And so one of the things that I'm really fascinated about when in the New Testament is the Gospels, specifically the first three Gospels that are called the Synoptic Gospels, because they're extremely similarly structured, often borrowing phrasing. They'll rearrange material, but they have a lot of stuff in common. Mm-hmm. And you've got the Gospel of John, which is basically a big, long theological essay couched as a narrative. But if you look at the first three Gospels, Jesus' whole message is don't be a dick to each other in radical ways. Like he's really talking about radical love. He's saying that your love for others should be all encompassing, but their love for you should be all encompassing. So it should even out. It's what sacrificial love, what we call in theology, agape love. It's self-giving love. It's the donation of the self. It's a form of ego death. It's a form of self-abnegation. And that's something that always really resonated with me. And then you look at Paul and the epistles of Paul, that's where you're seeing a lot of, if you masturbate or if you're gay, you're not going to heaven kind of stuff. But what Paul's doing is answering questions, like church discipline questions.
Like Talmud type stuff.
Like what?
Talmud. I'm Jewish.
Oh yeah,
and so,
very
and,
much, very
and
much
the,
like
the
that.
the commentary on the
Tom Lou.
like that guy Tom Lou. You know, he just writes pamphlets and hands them out on the subway. For those that aren't, for listeners that don't know, the Talmud is the commentary through the centuries on the Torah.
Yeah. So if you look at the first century of Christianity, you've got a whole bunch of different Christian communities popping up, not just, around the Mediterranean, like we think a lot about, the relationship of Christianity to Rome, but for the first millennium, like the weight of Christianity was in like the Middle East and Iran. Ctesiphon was a more widely recognized religious authority than Rome for a hot minute there. But there are all these different communities popping up that were all dealing with what they knew about Jesus in different ways and coming up with different interpretations of it. You had communities popping up that would emphasize their loyalty to a specific teacher. So you would have people who were like, oh, I follow Paul, I follow Peter, I follow James. And the sort of central organization, which was still built around the original apostles and their successors, was just trying to get people in line. They were like, no, we were the people who worked with and listened and heard and were right there with Jesus, and and then Paul comes up and he's like, forget all that. I have this whole other interpretation of the Old Testament and how it relates to Jesus, and we're going to be teaching that. And he just took over. And because his writings became normative. Mm-hmm. And so you do see this big rupture between Jesus and Paul.
So what is it about agape?
I didn't mean to make this a big theology podcast.
No, I think it's interesting. If this is something that is deeply formative of who you are as a person, I think it's. I'm happy to spend the entire hour talking about it.
Cool, let's do it.
Because what is it about? I mean, I want to talk about your mom a little bit too, and more about Richmond, because I do want to go back at some point, because the idea of a place being torn between the present and the past is very interesting to me. I think it's an interesting place to grow up. But agape, this idea of self-love that's also ego death, it's very interesting to me. Or not self-love, sorry, I misspoke. Self-sacrifice, right. Yeah. Sorry. But that's also ego death is very interesting to me, and I'm curious, what is it that about that idea that speaks to you or resonates with you?
I don't know how to make it explicit, not offhand. I'll try to talk through it. So I was always enamored of St. Francis. Mm-hmm. And St. Francis really always just seemed like the perfect explication of this. So, okay, I have an angle here. Okay. So what really fascinated me about Christianity, sort of once I really dove in, because I converted before I really even understood everything. I mean, because you never can. But I got really, really fascinated with the sense that Christ was preaching about a fundamentally new vision of humanity, like that we didn't have to live like this. And by live like this, I mean all of this. The way we're destroying the planet, the everything that's happening in the United States and across the world right now, none of that's necessary. And to see the stuff being done in Christ's name drives me insane, because at the end of the day, Jesus' whole thing is generosity and kindness and love and service and putting the needs of others ahead of yourself. And that seemed like revolutionary to me, that the apostles would hold all things in common. That was actually my introduction to leftism, was through Christianity and then more directly through Catholic social teaching, which actually enunciates a lot of the stuff into a program that can be applied politically. And that's all fascinating stuff. But just like, it just seemed really revolutionary to me that we could live our lives dedicated in kindness and love to each other and in seeking for the good of the other. Because if I'm seeking for the good of everyone else and they're all seeking for my good, then everything's going to be fine. I don't have to worry about making my rent because someone will help if I'm in trouble, you know. I wouldn't have to just in this if this was like the way the world was, I just wouldn't. Everything would just be way better. And that was an idea that absolutely just grabbed my heart. You know, I grew up really poor, and so I guess something about an ethical system that put the poor in a place of honor, so that you wouldn't. Because I grew up always feeling really ashamed and embarrassed. I didn't have enough. My clothes were ratty. My mom, she really did her best. She really did her best. But we had times where we had charity Christmases more than once. We had, food pantry. There were months where we lived off Chef Boyardee, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I guess it didn't have to be that way. That we could want to help each other. That resonated with everything I'd ever been taught. Just in terms of decency, it just seemed like, if we can live like this, why the fuck don't we? And the older I got, the more and more and more that really, really became something I was fascinated with. Because I would start reading, there's this Christian author named Shane Claiborne who is like a thinker behind what's called new monasticism or the radical discipleship movement, which is all about that self-abandonment for the good of others. And it's all about proclaiming that another world is possible. And they'll have groups of people move into like houses in like poor rundown neighborhoods and just try to be ministers to that neighborhood. And they would engage in like political protest. They were very against the war. You'd see what's actually really fascinating. There's this musical group that actually emerged out of this movement called Salters, that they were just a bunch of crusty punks in a van who loved Jesus and would drive around making weird music about Jesus and how fucked up America is and how this war is wrong and how capitalism is destroying us and how none of us have to live like that. And that still really compels me.
Like a Christian Black Flag.
Well, very, very different kind of sound. I always call it desert music. It's more like Christian Burning Man.
Okay.
Like they're crusty punks.
Okay.
They're filthy, unwashed, crusty punks with an accordion and a banjo.
Oh, okay. So I'm more towards the folky kind of. I see.
And they were just like that. Sort of introduced me to the idea that like the same criticism and even shame that I would apply to myself in my own moral life in my effort to be better, I could apply to society. And we could look at Christianity as a social thing, as an idea, as what would sometimes be called a revolution of love, as an evangelical, not in the sense of evangelicalism, but as a movement that was designed to always humble Caesar. Mm-hmm. To always remember that. So this is one of my favorite parables. It's not a parable. It's one of my favorite just sort of accounts from the Gospels. Is St. Peter comes up to Jesus and he says, hey, so people are wondering why we don't pay, the temple tax or whatever. It was one tax. It was either the temple tax or the state tax. And
to Rome.
It was either to Rome or to the temple. I can't remember which, but it all kind of comes down to the same thing. For the sake of the what I think is fascinating about it is he basically says, look, if they're going to be that worried about it, look, go down to the river, throw it in a net and pull out the first fish you get. When you open up that fish's mouth, there's going to be 2 coins, one for you and for me. That should satisfy them. And what he's basically saying is, if they want the money, fucking give them the money. Who cares? Because that's not what should be important to us. The line, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. Jesus says, whose face is on this coin? The emperor's face. So give to the emperor what's the emperor's. It's his money. Who cares? It's got his face on it. Who cares? We don't need to worry about it. Like, we can live in such a way that the empire doesn't even touch us. We don't need the empire to live. You know, so it's all about that introducing to anarchism and alternative structures of society and like building your own.
Yeah.
Like I'm a student of American history too. And if you look at the American Revolution to make that big jump, what you see is the colonial governments collapsed because people started listening to a different government. They would just have these committees of correspondence that were just there to coordinate revolutionary activity, and they became de facto state governments in the process just because people withdrew their recognition of one and moved it to the other. And that's how states fall, is when people stop caring what the government has to say. And so I looked as a very studious young woman. I looked out on the world, and I just thought, this is all fucked up. We don't have to do what they say. Like the old hippie slogan, what if they threw a war and nobody showed up? Like that really like started to like hit me in a big way. It's like, wow, what if we just didn't do what they said? What are they going to do if we all just stopped listening?
I mean, commit violence on us, but for a while.
But what if the soldiers stopped listening? What if everyone just stopped listening? Like that's what it ultimately comes down to, is everybody makes decisions. I was only following orders is never adequate. No. Because we're all making decisions about how we want to live. And we all go along with this. Now, this is my inner anarchist coming out, despite, I'm pretty socialist, but I have this like anarchist core in me. I'm socialist because I don't think we're ever going to have anarchism. So I'd rather have a state that actually works for our benefit. But what if we all just decided we didn't want to do that anymore? Then we could establish our own systems, our own structures. We could have real local justice. Yeah. We could handle just taking care of one another as communities. And I no longer think that's a thing humans are ever going to do. But that's what was like mattered to me so much about that idea.
I think it's important to strive for. I do agree. I don't think it's something people will do. I was thinking about this yesterday because I was in Philadelphia for a show. My wife and I do another podcast, and we did a live show in Philly.
I looked you up.
Oh, okay. And I saw I had brunch with a bunch of my old friends from grad school, and so we were talking about, and so it's in my head. Also, like yesterday was the mass shooting in El Paso, and so
Then there was today's mass shooting.
There wasn't. Jesus
Did you
Christ.
not hear about this?
No, I haven't really.
Yeah.
So everyone was screaming on
Dayton, Ohio.
Jesus Christ.
10 dead.
So like everyone's screaming on Twitter and I'm like, why doesn't everyone go join DSA, join some kind of some program where you can, instead of screaming on Twitter, go do a thing. I mean, you can do both, but like, I think two things. One, I think bougie whites are too comfortable, and so will never actively do anything because that would mean giving up some of their comfort and privilege. I think that's the number one thing. Yep. And number two, I think for a large majority of people, the idea that you can choose things, that you can choose how you want your life to be, that you can make these existential decisions. I think the existential anxiety of knowing that you are the author of your own destiny to an extent. There are large structural things that constrain what you can do. But like in terms of like who you can be, I don't know if there are a lot of constraints on that. And I think that strikes fear into the hearts of a lot of people. I
absolutely agree.
The idea that because I think about like my parents aren't bad people at all. In fact, they're very good, ethically good people. But for their lives, I think they just followed a script for a lot of their lives. They live in the suburbs, and they go see movies, and they go to temple, and they hang out with their friends, and the idea that they could do something else. I don't even know if they knew what else they want to, but they're like, this is what we do. We live here. We have a family, and we work, and that's that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And to be honest, for all of my big spiel there, I didn't do shit.
By the way, I wasn't calling you out.
No. I didn't think you were. That's me bringing that up. I didn't do shit. Like, I'm like agreeing with your point. I had all these like big ideas about how the world could change, and I did literally none of it. I was terrified. I didn't want to do it alone. If I could just have found if I just like had a friend who was willing to dive off the cliff with me, I think I could have done it, but I didn't.
Yeah, it's very tough. It's terrifying. If you're alone, it's very difficult to like kind of it took me. I've been a socialist for probably about 20 years now. I didn't join DSA and start doing anything. I didn't start like working to like close the camps until, I don't know, a month ago. I joined DSA like last year, and then I didn't actually like get off my ass until a month ago.
Same. I'm in the same boat. You're further ahead than me. I take the position, and I feel like this is probably me lying to myself. So now I'm going to lie to all of you. That my writing work is my contribution, that I'm trying to provide sort of the social fodder for the normalization of queer and trans identities and stuff like that. That's my work. But that's a really passive way to think about things. And I always kind of feel like shit for it. And not that that's going to change anything, because I'm always going to go home and get baked.
It's interesting. I wrote a paper a long time ago when I was in grad school about does art that disturbs. It was called like it was a philosophical term. This guy Arthur Danto was like the art of disturbation, basically like public art pranks.
I love that shit.
I think they're great because I was so into like Joey Skaggs, who was in, I think he lives in Arizona now or something, or New Mexico, but he was like a New York art prankster in the 70s, or like early UCB stuff was all about like doing art pranks. Like Besser was really into it, and I was like, does this actually move the needle on political things? Can you actually change anything? And I did a lot of stuff. Like DSA has a thing that I learned about called power mapping, which is really interesting to me, where I'm like, the reason why I wasn't that interested in activism like 20 years ago was that it was mostly like impotent marches and things like that, where I'm just like, after I saw 1 million people march against the war in Iraq and that didn't stop the murder of like 1 million Iraqis, I was just like, oh, okay, so that's not a good tactic. Or it's not a good tactic on its own. What else has to be done?
Yeah. So like that's actually part of the reason why I'm moving a little bit more into like I'm doing some young adult graphic novels, and that's really vital to me because you're helping the next generation form their attitudes.
Yeah.
So I'm doing these. I have a two book thing at HarperCollins at their young adult imprint, Balzer and Bray, and so yeah, it's 2 graphic novels that are, all about talking about how hate infects us. That have one of the main characters is trans. That just tries to offer a world to these kids that says something about the world they live in, in a positive way. So like the first book, The Ajawaja, deals with this kind of, which was the name of my childhood boogeyman growing up, deals with basically this monster that has been just like, sort of like crushing this one town's soul for 200 years by sort of feeding off and encouraging all their bigotry. And then in the modern world, it gets loose and attaches itself to like the most popular girl in school. And then it sort of translates that into like cliquish kind of stuff, but it's still ultimately all about rejection and exclusion. And then I'm doing another one that is going to be, it's going to be a kind of a more explicitly trans kind of horror story. That is going to be all about our ability to forge our own identities and letting go of harmful parts of ourselves.
I like that. I by the way, I don't mean to. I feel like I'm coming out strong against saying that like making art about important issues or like about representing people who haven't been represented in mainstream media isn't important. I think it's necessary.
I didn't get that vibe at all.
I'm reacting not to this, but I had a guest on a couple weeks ago, and she was saying she's Indian American, and she was saying that she hopes that being in TV shows helps show that to brown girls everywhere that you can do this too. And I agreed with her, and then I was like, I don't know what mood I was in then, but I was like, but there's more work to do. I forget exactly what I said, but I was like, I felt bad ever since then. So I'm making sure that I just wanted to say that I think it's necessary, but it's not sufficient.
Oh, it's definitely not sufficient.
But necessary. But I want to like really underline necessary, so that it doesn't sound like I'm just like, no, you got to overthrow the government. That's the only thing that's important.
But don't you wonder sometimes?
I mean, I do think I think it's interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine, and we're about he's gay, and he does on Instagram. He does a lot of critiquing of gay Instagram and like that culture. It's very funny. But we were talking about how like did representations of gay people in media move the needle on gay marriage, or was it that capitalism was like running out of people to exploit? So they're like, we need another group. And so that's how gay marriage became legalized. Again, that's a very simplified picture.
I get where you're coming from on it. And where I'm gonna land on that is gay people have been around for a long fucking time. Mm-hmm. And they could have chosen to market to us at any point, and we would have gladly given them our money. But it wasn't a thing that was okay to do.
Yeah, I see.
So what we have done is we have moved that window. We have created those spaces where companies can cynically cover themselves in rainbows. No, but like I think that's actually really interesting. That like they're at a point where it's like, oh, it's better business for us to be pro-gay than ignore it or dismiss it or be anti-gay, and that's never happened before. Yeah. And so I don't think that's. What I think is we're seeing capitalism exploit a changing environment to maximize their own profits.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it.
So one of the things that I do at my day job a lot is I'm in PR, but a lot of it is coming up with ways to explain to like news people. Like we'll get a lot of people wanting to talk to my boss because I do my boss's PR about like how to put it, like when Gillette did all those man up ads about like being less of a shitty toxic piece of garbage.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And everybody was so angry. And then Gillette also did one with a trans man in it where his dad was teaching him how to shave, and everyone's all open arms in it. And so we have to field reporters being like, so why is it that they're doing this if it's causing this backlash? And they're like, because they know which way the fucking wind's blowing. Mm-hmm. Like, companies don't believe anything. They're just organizations designed to make money. And they're just seeing, oh, this is a way we can make money. Gillette looked at an $8 million loss after they did, or whatever it was like, it was a big valuation loss after the Gillette thing. And they're like, yeah, that's worth it. And it's not worth it because they're fighting for what's right, although I'm sure that for a number of them that's true. But the reason why that mattered is because the company is looking at millennials and younger, people under 40, and they're looking at how we buy, how we vote, how we live. And they're like, that's the biggest purchasing demographic in the United States. So a 52-year-old is mad that we had a trans kid, or it wasn't a kid, it was a trans young man in a commercial, but they've got 20 years around tops. We want people who are going to be buying razors for the next 40 years.
Okay. I see. We're close to the end of the show. I just want to, the two things that I said that I wanted to go back to. What was your mom like when you were growing up? And then the in-betweenness, the temporal in-betweenness of Richmond.
Okay. So my mom, I need to go a little further back than when I was growing up to the mid-70s, and my mom was a groupie for Twisted Sister.
What?
Yeah.
What? All
Yeah,
right.
it was before they were a huge band, but she was one of their groupies on the Long Island music scene, which is actually how she met my dad.
Is incredible.
They were at a party together, and my mom sees my dad in his resplendent 70s mustache and hair, and she leans over to her friend, goes, do you know that guy? And she goes, yeah, that's Mike. Do you know anything about him? He goes, yeah, I think he's really into the Bible. And so my mom walks up to my dad and says, hey, can you teach me about the Bible? And he's like, sure. And goes and get his Bible out of the van at this fucking 70s party. And my mom's just like, because she just wants to get with my dad.
That is the oddest pickup line.
Right? Can you teach me about the Bible? It worked. I exist. So like I said, my dad's a rock musician, so we're very music-oriented family. I grew up, my mom stayed current with music. So I grew up, I'm more exennial than I should be just because of my mom's tastes and friends. Like my mom went back to college when I was a kid. So my mom's hanging out with people in their early 20s when she's in her mid 30s. So, which I get because I have friends in their early 20s and I'm 34. But they were all around the house, and my mom would be smoking weed, and my mom would be listening to Alice in Chains and Soundgarden, and my mom is this massive Alice in Chains fan. Like, she has a tattoo of Lane Staley.
Really?
Yeah. So you get a sense of my mom.
So you grow up, Jar of Flies is on all the time.
No, but my mom really liked Pearl Jam. My mom, she was really into James for a while, if anyone remembers that fucking band.
I do. James Laid. that was one of their songs, Laid. Or that was their album or something.
That was their album.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just remember seeing it in the bins, going through when I was digging through. I was a teenager in the mid-'90s, and...
That album's font is Papyrus.
What is it? Oh, that's the... I just remember looking like... What was around Jay? Jane's Addiction, probably. So I was probably looking for that. And J.K. Pixies, close to there. Anyway.
Yeah, so you kind of get
Yes.
like my mom's vibe.
Yeah. Very much so.
I didn't know she was smoking weed because she would just say she had burned a cigarette filter. And I was like, you do that a lot. And she was like, yeah, I know. I don't know what it is. And I figured out when I was in high school what had been going on. And when my mom offered to buy me weed when I was in high school. And because, for what should be obvious reasons, I said no. Because you don't want to smoke weed with your mom?
Right. Were you weirded out by the idea of smoking weed
I was weirded
in
out
general?
that my mom had said that.
Or it's that it's coming from your parents?
Because I knew she was cool, but I didn't know she was that cool.
Was that weird having, like, you said that you kind of like kept to yourself when you were younger.
Yeah.
Was that weird having like stereotypically cool parents?
Oh, my mom was not stereotypically cool. My mom was my mom. I guess maybe my sister's friends all seem to think she was cool. So maybe she was. I mean, I think she's awesome. And I would totally get baked with her now because I think that would be amazing fun. It's one of the things I really love about both having transitioned and being in my 30s is just how much is my ability to just relate to my mom as like a person now, and to just kind of understand just how rad she is, because she's really rad, you know. And like she's what, 60, and she dyed her hair purple last year.
Okay.
You know,
That to me, that sums up who your mom is.
My mom in the last couple of years has gotten like upper ear piercings, and she's cool. My mom's cool. She's rediscovering her rocker chick after years of trying to be someone's wife.
Yeah. Okay. I see that. So she like, that's who she is. She kind of like pushed it down a little bit to become like a suburban mom.
Yeah. But she was never great at being a suburban mom. She was a great mom. She wasn't a great suburban mom.
I see that. Yeah. I get. So, okay. So then well, actually, wait, one more thing. And then when you were losing your faith, I don't know how much you want to talk about this, and you can tell me. I'm just curious about the idea of like, how, like, did you move towards progressive politics as you were losing your faith to try? Because like the ethical systems.
No, I moved to progressive politics at the height of my faith.
Okay.
My dad's actually very, very conservative. And so I was raised very conservative. And I actually remember in my freshman year of college, this guy said to me, "The Pope opposes the war in Iraq. Why don't you?" And I just said, I don't have to agree with everything the Pope says, which is true. But it really stuck in my head because I realized I didn't have a good answer. And my conservatism collapsed very shortly thereafter. My conservatism fell really hard when I realized that I was just being reflexive.
Yeah.
That I wasn't thinking.
Yeah.
That I was just regurgitating things I'd been taught. And my move to leftism took a long time. There's a lot of things in the way of that when you're Catholic. The reflexive anti-communism, the reflexive anti-homosexuality, the reflexive anti-abortion kind of thing. And so for a long time that kept me from really identifying with that side of the political spectrum. I would call myself a centrist, by which I meant I'm a radical socialist who is squicky about homosexuality and abortion.
Okay.
Which I'm, for the record, not anymore. But yeah, I mean, like it's the great irony of my life that my Catholicism is what led to me leaving my Catholicism.
I see. Okay.
They always did say that leaving the Catholic Church would be a slippery slope to homosexuality and socialism, and here I stand proving them right.
So, okay, the last thing is the in-betweenness of Richmond, because I find that fascinating. And I feel like this is almost a very Southern feeling. That I see it a lot in guests that were raised in the South, about that feeling of being in between times.
Well, there's the Southern memory is very long.
Yeah.
The Southern memory is very long, and it is traumatized. And that I'm going to say we because I am a Southerner, but I'm speaking in a group sense when I say this. We have never gotten over the Civil War. We haven't, in a way that I don't think Northerners can ever really understand. Without honestly, I don't think it's possible. You got to grow up with it. Like, when you're a kid and you grow up in Richmond, Virginia, and you're white, hell, even if you're black, you will just kind of have been rooting for the South.
Huh.
Not because it wasn't about slavery. That's what you've been told.
Right.
So it's not a moral thing. You're like they were defending their homes. Robert E. Lee could not turn his sword against Virginia. That's why he's a hero. That's why we have a statue of him. Not because he fought to preserve slavery, but because he couldn't turn a sword against his home. And that's who you grow up with. And
almost like a sports team. Like you just you root for the sports team that you're born near.
Yeah, I get. Yeah. I see where you're coming from on it. It's there's. I don't know how to put it. It's the past never leaves. In New York, we tear buildings down. In Virginia, we gut them and leave the facade up, so it still looks the same. There's tons of that, of just buildings that are my first apartment building. The first apartment I ever lived in on my own was a Reconstruction era house. There was a fireplace in literally every room, you know? And that's vast swaths of Richmond are just all buildings that old. And there's all these, and there's the statues everywhere, and you grow up with the lost cause ideology. They really do. Like when people say heritage, not hate, I genuinely think that they mean it. I disagree, because you don't get to by yourself determine what a symbol means, because semiotics isn't just about what you're expressing, but what is being expressed. And those aren't always the same thing. But I think they mean it because they see it as a flag of this very particular part of the world. You grow up in Virginia and I don't know how universal this is, but I can definitely say in the sense of Virginia, there's almost a nationalism of being from Virginia specifically, just because of how much history is from here. We had a Virginia history course in elementary school, just about all the history of Virginia. It's everywhere. The past doesn't ever go away. We're constantly trying to reconcile ourselves to it. A number of years ago, I mentioned Monument Avenue, and everyone was thinking like, oh, we have this Monument Avenue and it's just Civil War statues, Civil War generals and Confederate generals, but this is a really black city. We should have a statue of a famous black Richmonder up. And the fight over that dominated a huge chunk of my childhood. Like that was all huge news in the city all the time, was what are we going to do? Are we going to put us, we ended up on, the debate was, should it be this guy, tennis player, Arthur Ashe, like world-class tennis player, proud Richmonder. His name's everywhere in Richmond. Should we put a statue of him up on Monument Avenue? And ultimately we did. It's the worst statue I've ever seen, too. They wanted to communicate both his athleticism and his post-retirement advocacy for literacy education. And so it shows him holding up a tennis racket and a bunch of books, and there are a bunch of kids like reaching up, but it looks like he's stolen their books and he's threatening them with a tennis racket. And even then, just another couple of years ago, we put up the Richmond Race and Reconciliation statue, whatever it was fucking called. That's just a figure, just two abstract figures hugging. But at the same time, not far from that, the site of the largest slave auction site in the United States, there's not even a marker. You know?
So it's not just that it's that there is some kind of like feeling of the past that's in the air. It's that literally the past is physically there in front of you.
Yeah.
And that's what contributes to it.
Like, if you want to understand specifically a Virginian's relationship with the past, just ask them to talk about Thomas Jefferson, because Virginia has two gods, and they are Thomas Jefferson and Robert E. Lee. And now the Jefferson cult is very much centered around Charlottesville. Mm-hmm. You can't escape the Jefferson cult there. They call him TJ. But like, we will be like, yeah, our state capitol was designed by Thomas Jefferson. We have Monticello. George Washington's, like, we do these pilgrimages to Colonial Williamsburg and to the reconstructed Jamestown Village. We had this really we would have Civil War reenactors come to school and teach us about the Civil War and how the Confederate soldiers lived.
Oof.
You know, they would talk about the Northern soldiers, but they were all in gray. And I remember that, and I was 10. I thought that was the coolest shit in the world. You know, there's just you can't escape it. You can't escape not just the past, but the Confederacy. And there's very deliberate reasons for that. After, during Reconstruction, after there was the redemption movement in Virginia, but really throughout the South, where ex-Confederates, once they were sort of restored to the common citizenry, they got their voting rights back, they weren't barred from public office, that kind of thing. They just took over all the Reconstruction. They really overthrew all the Reconstruction governments and put in place reactionary ex-Confederate governments that had control over the school curriculums for the next. I mean, really, we're looking at the entire Jim Crow era going from 1870 to the 1960s and past that. Just to give you a sense of how deep all this stuff goes. Virginia was the only state in the United States where after school integration, a county just said no and shut down their public school system. Mm-hmm. The only county in America that implemented massive resistance was in fucking Virginia. And they robbed an entire generation of black kids of an education. And you still see the legacy of that. If you're a kid in the 90s in Virginia and you're checking to see if there's a snow day, you're going to see coming across your screen, like Beulah Christian Academy. Christian Academy was code for a white school. But I didn't know that at the time. But the detritus of that very much war, this first Civil War and then cultural smashing down of black people in the South, is something that is just everywhere in Virginia. You can't ignore it. And so if you're like a millennial in Virginia and you're halfway politically like aware, there's this whole part of you that wants to figure out how do we leave this behind without leaving behind Virginianness. We're constantly trying to figure out how we can be modern while still being Southern. And I don't know that there's a way to do that. As a conflicted Southerner expatriate living in New York.
I've thought for a long time that we need some kind of actual, in the same way that South Africa had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I'm like, it's all the stuff that as a country we are repressing and pushing down is like the reason we live in the world we live in now is because all that repressed shit has come out in such a toxic, gross way.
And so everyone's screaming at everyone. Like, I've reached my limit of just being angry all the time on Twitter because we're just supposed to be angry all the time.
Yeah.
And I wish that it was possible to have just frank communications. Here is how you harmed me. And I'm not asking for anything, but I need you to know what it was that you did to me. And I want you to tell me the story of why you did that to me so we can at least both understand what's happening.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm not saying anyone needs to forgive anyone. I'm not saying stuff needs to let slide. I just wish, in the same way that after Rwanda, they just were like, look, we can't move forward and we can't jail half the country. So we just have to figure out how do we just get some scar tissue over this and find a way, figure out what's our next chapter going to be now that this has happened.
Actually seems like a nice place to end. I mean, not nice, but like
with Rwanda.
How about what's the word I'm looking for? Not poetic. That seems like a poignant place to end. Poignant. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a lovely time.
And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.